Thank you for listening to WQPH 89.3 FM Shirley, Fitchburg, and thank you for tuning in to WQPH's Local Matters. On this week's broadcast, abortion is at its forefront. And WQPH's Marianne Harold, attorney Tom Harvey, and other guests discuss the current situation.
Well, hello, and thank you for joining us again today on Local Matters. My name is Marianne Harold, and we have some very distinguished guests here. They're going to talk about where things are in the pro-life movement. And we'll begin by introducing each person, and then we'll see who wants to start. So we have a very distinguished attorney here, Tom Harvey. You might recognize his gallant attempt and successful charge with referendum petitions, initiative petitions. Talk a little bit, Tom, about what you did.
Well, what recently happened here in the state was we were trying to defeat the Roe Act. And the Roe Act was put forth by the abortion industry. What they claimed was to increase abortion access in the state. And the pretense was because of the Supreme Court's makeup of Amy Coney Barrett and other pro-life justices, that the claim was that in Massachusetts, abortion was endangered, which was really a fraud. Because if Roe versus Wade ever gets overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, it just goes back to each particular state. And in Massachusetts, the legislature is very pro-death, and so really abortion wouldn't be affected at all. But they used that as a pretense to claim that this new law expanding abortion was necessary. So what happened was the abortion industry proposed this law way back in I think it was about maybe in January of 2020. It was in committee, and we were hoping to end it in July 31st when the state legislative session ended. However, we reached that point. It never got out of the Judiciary Committee, and we thought we had won. However, because of COVID, they expanded the session so that they waited, that is the Democrat leadership in the Massachusetts legislature, waited until after the November elections, and then they brought it back up. And this so-called Roe Act had some horrible things. One was to allow for what's called passive infanticide. That is, if a baby survives a botched abortion, the law on the books that had been there for many, many years had said that the physician shall, use the word shall, use reasonable efforts to save the baby, his life and health. This proposed law would eliminate that requirement. The law also, proposed law, would have gotten rid of any consent for minors getting abortions. So the law on the books had been that one parent had to consent, or if the girl did not want to get the parent's consent, then she could go to a judge and get the judge to allow it. That was the law for many, many years, I think about 30 years. So that was eliminated as well. And then also there was a lot of terrible aspects to this bill, but another one was allowing non-physicians to do abortions for 23 weeks and earlier. So those were the different proposals on this bill. We were urging people to make phone calls and contact their legislators to try to stop this, and it worked to some extent. We also were having people call the governor. So anyway, the bill came forward. They watered it down a little bit. It's still a horrible bill, but it was watered down to some extent. For example, they put back in for minors, a 14 and 15-year-old girl would have to get still her parents' consent or judge's approval. But 16 and 17-year-olds, the way the final law came down, do not have to get parental consent. Another aspect that was changed was the original Roe Act required the state to increase funding for taxpayer funding for abortions. That was also eliminated from the final bill. And the original bill had eliminated the requirement to have life-saving equipment in the room where late-term abortions were being performed. That was put back in. However, the big thing was where originally the law had said that the physician must use that equipment if it was required. The new law merely says they're enabled to use it, so they don't have to. Such that where an abortionist is trying to kill this baby and something goes wrong and the baby is born, what chance does that baby have to live with this guy or whatever, this physician trying to kill it? And without the protection of law, that baby doesn't stand much of a chance. So that's essentially what happened. So the bill came out. They didn't even go through the committee. The Democrat leadership just added it as an amendment to the budget.
Horrifying.
It was approved by the legislature, a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate. It went to the governor, Governor Baker, who essentially vetoed it. First, he sent back recommendations for changes. He said he was bothered by the reduction of the age of minors. That was one of his main complaints. They rejected his recommendations. They sent it back to him. He then essentially vetoed it. It went back to the legislature, and on Christmas Eve, he vetoed it. It went back, and on the Day of the Holy Innocents, 28th of December, the House overrode the governor's veto by a 2/3 vote and essentially passed it into law, because in the Senate, there was a foregone conclusion they were going to override the governor's veto, which they did. So that horrible bill is now the law in Massachusetts.
What a shame. Let's hear from some of our other guests here. Francine LaRiviere, who's our reporter, WQPH, on the street with the meat, with this real story of what's going on. And Francine, tell us what you think about this enactment of the law.
It's just, like you said, horrifying. Sad,
So you saw some of the prayer attempts to disarm this from going forward. Tell us one of the things you were doing every Sunday.
Yes, every Sunday, myself and about 20 to 50 people, we get together, we show up in front of the State House and do the Walk of Jericho around 7 times. I think it's 3.5 miles. We walk around with a banner. And Rita Russo had made the banner. And we pray.
40 Days for Life, right?
40 Days for Life.
Mm-hmm.
I carry an image of Divine Mercy, and I have the Holy Face over my back. And we're just witnesses. We give out, I give out cards to people walking by. I met a father and a daughter, Maggie, and her dad was Dennis, and they stopped me at one point, and I just talked to them while everybody went around the State House. And
were they praying when they went around the State House?
No, they said well, he wanted to know exactly what we were doing, and he said my and why, and I told him, and he said, how do you have a conversation with a young lady that's being brought up in this culture? He said, I'm her dad, and I'm trying to talk to her, and she was telling me that she was for abortion, and she said that she didn't believe in God. And so we talked about asking God to show her the truth, and for her to seek the truth and to not give up asking questions, because if you continue to ask questions, we're told that we'll find the truth, which is Jesus and life. It's just, I said, if you know anything about Scripture, even, I knit you in your mother's womb. That tells you that the Lord knows you intimately, and I know how many hairs are on your head. That's not somebody that doesn't care about the children that are made in His image. And so the dad just asked me why we were doing the walk around the State House, and I told him, and he said the same thing. It was horrifying and I said, the devil's talked about in the Bible as being a roaring lion. Right now it's the unborn, it's the elderly. Look at what happened in New York. Well, where's the outrage? Nothing's being said about all these people that had died in the nursing home. I said, so there's, life is being snuffed out left and right, and the devil's not going to stop there. It's going to keep going. We have to stop it somewhere, start advocating for each other, and pretty soon we're going to find ourselves on the other end.
Right. And also joining us today from Worcester with another point of view is our Massachusetts head of Prayers for Life, Chris Telosco, a dear friend, really strong prayer warrior. Chris, welcome, and what is your take on all of what has been happening?
Well, I don't see how anybody can listen to what the evidence, even the evidence that's being given on secular radio. I don't know how they can listen to it and not be pro-life. I mean, because it's just murder on our streets. But as for myself, my experience goes back quite a few years now, as you know, Marianne.
Yes.
I was, at the time, I was working, and I had to take a Worcester bus out to not outside the city, but at the limits.
Mm-hmm.
And I was standing there one morning waiting for the bus, and there's a well-known hall in Worcester, Mechanics Hall, where they put on a lot of wonderful shows and things like that. And in front of it, there were rectangular stones in the sidewalk. It was the old-fashioned sidewalk. Now, I was standing there with a group of people, and some of us were waiting to go to the same insurance company for work. And I happened to look down, and I said to my friend who was with me, I said, "Look at that." I said, "That looks just like a fetus in the stone." And she looked over and she said, "Yeah, it does." And then I looked at the next one, and it was just like a pro-life rose right in the stone. And the bus came along, and the bus driver stopped, and he said, "Are you ladies getting on the bus?" My friend said to him, "Look at that." She said, "It looks just like a fetus." And a black woman sitting on the bus looked out the window, and she said, "Oh, it's a baby." And that really kind of started my whole journey. I had already been witnessing in front of abortion clinics, but I was so impressed by that, and that did not just, there was work being done on the Mechanics Hall building, but that they were washing down the outside of it. And I think, that's how all this came about. But it didn't go away for a long time, and people who I told them about it, they came by and they would stop and look, and someone actually knelt on the sidewalk and prayed.
Isn't that beautiful?
And I really I tried to find out if I could get the stone or more information about it, and called the company that was doing the work, but actually I didn't really get any place, but I finally did get some pictures taken, and I'm not a picture taker. I'm not good at it. So
that was the beginning of your entrance.
It was the beginning of it,
wow.
Right.
Yes, and you brought along with you a friend that I'm coming to know and very much appreciate, Catherine Whalen from Worcester. You have a journey there, too. I think we have to talk about the face of abortion and the truth of abortion. And I know you've seen it. Share a little bit about your experiences, Kathy.
Sure. The beauty of my profession is that the abortion clinic that is closest to the school is about 3 blocks from Doherty High School. And many of the students that I teach or are familiar with walk by down a very busy street on Pleasant Street where Planned Parenthood is. And many of the kids would smile at me and as we were praying outside because they knew me as a teacher. And they would wave to me. And then you saw other people, other kids just, look at one another and shake their heads. And you could see that the division in young children. And just people that were 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. These are high school people. And what you recognize as you pray, week in and week out, during all the seasons, but very specifically during 40 Days for Life, is the absolute dehumanization of people who drive up in a car with a young woman as a passenger who potentially is going in to get an abortion and she gets out of the car, and that other person drives away. Psychologically, spiritually, physically, for any woman that's going through this, it's such a young age, but for any woman that is going through this procedure, not to have anybody with them, particularly during the COVID, that was not allowed at all. And it continues to not be allowed at all. To watch this, and to watch this as a normalcy, that some young woman on any given day is going to walk in all by herself and change her life, and there's no one there except a pro-abortionist sitting there saying, no, you really need to do this. And that has wreaked havoc with young children, so much so that they are so damaged by what they've done that they've come to marginalize themselves. And in marginalizing themselves, therefore they have no expectations of how they should relate to young men or other young women, and their anger is over the top. And I've seen outside that clinic, I've seen young men try to talk to their girlfriends and ask them not to have an abortion and walk down a street going back to wherever they came from with tears, just crying, and it's an unbelievable, inhumane, dehumanizing, everyday event on Pleasant Street in Worcester, Massachusetts. And to suggest that young people know what they're doing is just absolutely untrue. This society has told children that they should participate in experiences that they are no more capable of understanding and can be responsible for, yet condoms and birth control are placed in their hands as if they know what they're doing. And I know that they don't know what they're doing because we've placed cell phones in adults' hands, and I know they don't know what they're doing because they became addicted to them. And so on a day that we were down at the school committee meeting and we were fighting Planned Parenthood's curriculum to be placed into the city's schools, people weren't even listening, the adults in the room. They were all on their phones. And this society has become this consumptive, addictive thing created by institutions like Planned Parenthood that has absolutely stolen the culture and the morality of this culture. It's become completely amoral. So it's just detrimental to our society, and we can see it. And also, Planned Parenthood is anti-science. It's anti-science. Everyone knows the moment of conception, you're completely made. There's nothing that comes after. That moment is you. And you grow, and that's that. And most of the people in this country and in this state do not believe that you should have an abortion after so many weeks. And that's agreed upon by people in the state of Massachusetts. And for the legislature to push past those limits that people put that would place on abortion, and I don't agree with it, but now we're into infanticide. So they're moving, these people, the legislators in this state and Planned Parenthood, are moving the culture of death even farther along so that we can just kill people when we want to.
Yes, that's true. I think we need to turn this back to Attorney Harvey here.
Yeah, thanks.
Comment on that.
On that. A couple of things. What Francine said about prayer, I think that, people will ask, well, where do we go from here? Well, I think the most important thing we do is pray. I think to pray for pro-life, both in Massachusetts and in the country, for a good result coming up. That's one thing. And also the talk about dehumanizing. This new statute, that they use dehumanizing language. For example, what had been in the statute was talk of the child and the mother. They're now going to talk about the patient and the pregnancy, just to dehumanize the infant and no longer use the language of mother. What also can we do besides prayer? Well, we can remember those legislators that voted pro-life. I think it's important to acknowledge them, to thank them a lot of them were being pressured by the other side, being pressured by Planned Parenthood to vote the wrong way. But they held their ground and did vote the right way, and we're going to need them again in the future. And it's also important to remember who voted the wrong way. I refer to them as pro-death legislators. That's what they are. They'll be running again. We need to oppose them. We need, if there's opponents running against them, we need to support them as volunteers or financially, and or consider running for office. If you're a pro-life person. The legislature, in my view, is much more pro-death than the electorate at large. And that's where we stand right now, and we gotta make changes. So I think those are the important things that we need to do.
Good move. But I think this is an important thing that the Lord gave us this time to talk about, really the face of abortion. I think Kathy brought up some very good points about her experiences on what I'd call unpleasant street, not Pleasant Street, in Worcester, that all the things she's witnessed as a teacher. So you bring your background as a teacher and a lover of the youth that you've inspired. Where are they going to go, Kathy? Where are these kids going to go that are just inundated with untruth? Where?
Well, within the moment of their decisions, they can go walk across the street to problem pregnancy, where most wonderful people who have been there for years, Lee Crowley and Kathy and Sandra and a bunch of wonderful women who advise them as to the science. They advise them as to the science. They have the charts. They have the the models of children in the womb, and they show children and they save children. And people come back and thank them, and they bring their child to them. And a lot of times people, particularly people who can't afford it, think I need to go into Planned Parenthood and have an abortion. And so what happens is if you walk across the street to problem pregnancy, you have the capacity to get insurance. So insurance for your child, you can get all kinds of resources that you need in order to raise a child, just quite frankly, diapers and baby bottles and Enfamil and clothing, and there's so many donations there. And then also we have Visitation House, which Chris can talk about.
Okay, tell us about Visitation House, Chris.
Well, Visitation House is where a young mother or a mother-to-be can go to await the baby or to bring her child. And from what I have not actually worked at Visitation House myself, but I know that there is so much available to them, as Kathy says, clothing, food, and also classes that help them to they get better employment and to improve themselves in the first place, but then being able to take care of their child from then on.
So I know someone who was listening has a great idea. It might be you or you or you. Why not get involved locally if you can? Francine, what do we have locally here in the Boston area where women can go?
In the Boston area, St. Elizabeth's has a pregnancy help where they do the same thing that Chris was talking about. Also, there are people that will help out in front of Planned Parenthood, and there's resources that people, all they need to do is ask.
Okay.
People that are praying the rosary, they're always saying, do you need help? Do you need help? And if that person doesn't know the answer, they'll get the answer from someone else. People go there to just pray, but then sometimes they find themselves, they're the ones that showed up, and so they're the ones that are approached. But everybody's connected.
Right.
So, if you go up to someone, you say, I do need help, they'll get you the help.
Excellent. Okay, now let's have Tom wrap up our program, which is far too short, with what he sees the future.
Well, I think for the future, we're going to have some decisions to be making. One, there is a constitutional provision which allows for the people to overturn a law. So it's a massive effort. I don't know whether it's going to have to be decided by a lot of different organizations, but we'd have to collect 80,000 plus signatures to put it on the ballot, and that is to overturn this new abortion law. The signature campaign, if it were to be done, were to be held this fall. One of the other things I think that's got to be emphasized is how racist abortion is. I think the statistic in Massachusetts is something like 40% of abortions are done on minority women, whereas the population as in the whole is not close to 40%. So it is an effort by many to eliminate the minority population. For example, we talk about Planned Parenthood and its racist origins. Margaret Sanger was intent on eliminating the black race. I don't know whether that's been publicized enough. I'm sure it has not been. But I think that's one thing that should be emphasized, and that African American community should realize that there's an effort to limit their population. So I think we've got to spread that word far and wide. That's one thing. The other is I'm thinking that we've got to keep the issue alive. We've got to be talking to people about it, and whether the answer may be billboards in that regard. But unless people talk about an issue, nothing's going to change. And we don't want to just defeat the Roe Act. I mean, that's just playing defense. We will never win by just playing defense. That's like a baseball team. You can't win unless you get to bat. So we've got to take the offensive at some point. I tried to do that in past years by having a signature campaign to amend the state constitution to stop the public funding of abortion as a constitutional right. So based on a 1981 case, the Supreme Judicial Court found that it's a constitutional right in Massachusetts to have abortions paid for by the taxpayer. So we need to change that as a first step. It's not going to change on its own. We've got to take a step to do that. And that, again, is a major effort. You'd have to collect, again, it would be in the fall, over 80,000 signatures. And I plan to try to lead that campaign again. It's a very difficult thing, and if we get the cooperation of enough people, we can get it done. But that's the plans for the future, Marianne.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us today, and our listeners who really do care about the unborn, their unborn children, grandchildren, of their relatives. It is a terrible affliction that we are faced with here. But together with our prayer life and people that have joined us today that want to do something, please discern what you can do in your life. Maybe you want to pray. Maybe you want to have a mass said for life, Our Lady's pro-life intentions. We'll continue this talk. Until then, we love you and we thank you for supporting our pro-life ministry at Prayers for Life Apostolate. God's blessings.
Amen.
Thank you for listening to WQPH's Local Matters. We hope you enjoyed the broadcast and hope you have a blessed week.